good morning, and welcome to the Ripple Impact. This week, our guests are joining us live from Cannes International Festival of Creativity, catching the early tremors of ideas that could shape the industry. I'm Laura Barber, and I've got the insiders here, the wave makers, and the behind-the-scenes buzz that you just don't want to miss. So let's dive in. Good morning, all. Good morning from Cannes. Joining me live in the thick of the creativity and the chaos is Adam Morgan, partner of Eat Big Fish, ready to share with us and drop the ripples that you need to hear at home. So, Adam, you've been live on stage this week at Cannes, sharing the eye-watering cost of dull media. Sounds fascinating. Can you give our listeners the insider track on what you've been sharing this week?
I can. Just before I do that, I'm going to just sort of set the scene for you a bit because I want you to kind of feel the whole Cannes sense around kind of vibe.
Please
So
do.
I've managed to get the sort of palm tree in the background there, which is good. This is the terrace of the villa. I'm just going to show you the hot tub.
Excellent.
And then behind me is the bay, which is kind of nice. What
Beautiful.
you can't actually see is the villa behind me that was having a thumping party till 3:30 in the morning. But it gives you a sense of the kind of whole thing that's
Well, it
going
wouldn't
on.
be Cannes without a late night party, would
No,
it?
exactly. Yeah, so I was talking with Dr. Karen Nelson-Field about the second part of a 3-year project that I'm doing with her and a couple other people, including Peter Field and John Evans, about putting a cost on dull. So
Yeah.
I've been in the business over 40 years, and I'm just shocked at about the amount of dull and mediocre stuff that is still being produced by our industry, and want to try and do something about it. And so I had said to Peter Field, who's an old friend, we started advertising together in 1982, said, could you take all your data about the IPA data, about the upside of effectiveness, and turn it upside down? Because we know that creative effectiveness works, but actually it's just not having enough of an impact. Could we put a concrete cost on what it costs a brand to be dull? So John Evans and I reported on Peter's work and System One's work on the cost of dull content last year. And so this year we're doing the cost of dull media with Dr. Karen Nelson-Field from Amplified, who's an expert, as you probably know, in attention. And so we're doing that on the Rotunda stage on Monday, and then I'm repeating it for the Marketing Academy today. And just Karen's done a fantastic piece of analysis, really, which saying, we may not think of some media as being duller than others, but it is because it's high scroll, fast decay, and also contextually it's in a high distraction environment, so it's duller. And the more you get from engaging to duller, where attention starts to fall off very dramatically, it's not just that, it's less effective because you need, for instance, 2.5 seconds to create memory structures. You're getting less than 2.5 seconds. It's not just more expensive, it's just not working at all, particularly for a challenger. That's her point. So the types of brands that need attention most are the ones that are most penalized by dull environments. So really interesting piece of analysis as the second stage of the cost of dull. And then alongside that, as a bit of fun, we thought we'd launch a fragrance. So I had a call last year from the president of a French agency who said, I want to replicate in France the Costa del project. And I said, so that's interesting. So what is the Costa del in French? And he said, it's le coup d'ennui. And I thought, oh, wow, that's, well, first of all, ennui, even boredom sounds sexier in French.
Of course.
Yes. What a fabulous language. But secondly, ennui sounded like one of those big kind of cheesy over-the-top fragrance launches, from the 80s. So we've created a fragrance called Ennui that smells of burning money. And I would give you, Laura, a kind of little spritz of it, but it'll have to wait till we're back. It does smell.
They haven't quite invented that yet, have they?
Not yet. Not as
they need to.
podcast, technology, this kind of stuff. You're going to turn on microphone, camera.
Smell-o-vision.
Smell-o-vision, exactly. So that's gone down.
Well, for a perfume ad, you're going to have to do a fabulous... You're going to have to do a perfume ad while you're in Cannes. You've got the perfect setting to do an epic advert that, of course, you'll drop at Christmas.
Well, I have, funnily enough, I'm here with my couple of people from the office, and one of them wants me to pretend to be George Clooney this afternoon, as I do exactly the same. So we'll see.
Or you could do the Daniel Craig walking out the sea, James Bond.
Yeah, maybe next year.
Oh, well, fantastic. And you got the T-shirt to match, so wonderful.
And I appreciate
Um,
that. Indeed. There you go.
Love it. So, what's been the biggest ripple moments that you've witnessed at Cannes? So, at the Ripple Impact, we talk about the small moments that actually can become waves. And often at Cannes, you can hear conversations of the newest, the latest, the greatest. Yes, there's the big awards, but what I'm really interested in the little ripple conversations and moments that you're hearing that you think could have a big impact on the industry beyond the beaches of Cannes.
Yeah. So obviously, there's a lot of conversation around AI,
Of
obviously.
course. Yeah.
And I had lunch with a client yesterday who I didn't know particularly well. I've only met them twice. But I was just saying, I'm on this podcast tomorrow. Tell me about what struck you, little things.
Yeah.
And she said that she'd been in a presentation that morning where a company had come and said, give me a strategic problem. And in 4 hours, I can give you a strategy and finished executions in four
Wow.
hours. So there's a lot of conversation in Cannes about speed
Yeah.
and the need to move faster, partly because there's a lot of conversation about content creators and the balancing content creators and
Hmm.
advertising agencies and the big idea and lots of small ideas, partly because content creators are quote unquote moving at the speed of culture. And so there's a
Absolutely.
need
Yeah.
for brands to move much faster as well. But that was the most extreme version of speed I've heard, I think, four
Yeah.
hours.
Wow. Yeah.
And clearly, there's a whole disintermediation of agencies generally there. So on the one hand, you've got these enormous agencies everywhere, kind of jostling, with their chests out for attention. You've got the big tech companies camped out on the beach,
Yeah.
and then you've got this highly disruptive technology, and there's a swirl of confusion and
Mm.
optimism, pessimism,
And a little
um,
dash of fear.
lots of dash of fear. Yeah,
Mm.
there's a lot of conversation about how slow it is for agencies at the moment, particularly in continental Europe for some reason I don't quite understand. So a lot of fear.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I think it's interesting because there's a lot of talk around the fear of AI that we're just going to average to the bottom. And that actually there's a huge role still for agencies in connecting the humanness of brands back to people and how they do that in a way that's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean that's a really interesting question, and for me, I suppose it's the kind of location of where AI is used. So there's
Mm.
a really interesting brand called Lettuce in the States, which is a financial services startup. It does tax advice. So Laura starts her own
Right.
business. You're a solopreneur in America.
Yeah.
Lettuce helps you structure your business to fit, American tax laws. So it falls under the very boring but very important kind of category. And so the CSO there, Gabrielle Tenaglia, did a very interesting thing, which she said, we're doing lots of it sort of okay, but quite dull, bottom of the funnel stuff. Why don't I try and do something more interesting? So she gets two creatives out of a very good agency called 72 and Sunny, and she briefs them to do some scripts, produce some scripts. And very much she's got a fintech CEO, and she says to the fintech CEO, I want to take four of these and produce them using AI, just produce them. So they're not generated by it,
Mm.
but produce them using AI. So it'll cost very little, and then test them on Meta. So the CEO says, how much to produce all 8 rather than just 4? If we want to test them. And she says, well, X. He says, well, that's not very much. Let's test all 8. Test all 8. And the one she really wanted to do, which was a musical about tax services, outperforms the others by a factor of 10. So
Wow.
suddenly it's a very easy conversation for the CEO, fintech CEO, with investors on their
Yeah.
shoulder to say, oh, we'll do the really creative one.
Mm.
And it's just done fantastic things for their business.
Yeah.
So in that particular case, the location of AI, which is about producing human-generated
Yes,
ideas,
absolutely. Yeah.
takes out the burden of proof, and you must have been in this situation lots of times in the
Absolutely.
past.
Yeah.
Takes out the barrier of we can't afford to kind of test that effectively or produce that to test that, and means they've got a fantastic piece of work.
Yeah.
So you can see how in certain situations, in certain locations in the process, AI will be this massive
Absolutely.
enabler of great creativity. I think what everybody's concerned about is companies just saying, yeah, we'll just generate the bottom 2/3 of the funnel using AI. We'll get the agency to the fun bit at the top, but the rest of it will.
Yeah.
And then once the CFO has signed off that much more cost efficient way of doing things, there's no going back, right? That's a one way valve.
Mm. Mm. I think what's really interesting about that example as well is the client that you mentioned, her instinctual thought on the one that was the best actually was the one that did the best. So there's still a role for the human in terms of knowing what's right for my brand, what's right for my business, what's right for this moment in time, and using that intuition and that humanness throughout the process as well. So AI has an incredible power for efficiency and process and speed and reassurance. But the more human and the more raw and the more the real, the more truth you can have in that as a starting point, I think sets you up for fantastic success. And
Well, I
love that
do agree with that.
example.
But my other little ripple, I suppose, is
Please.
somebody on the agency side who said that they'd presented a script to one of their clients, and their clients had asked ChatGPT if it was a good idea.
Oh dear.
So, so your thing about human agency only works with people who have genuinely good judgment, and not everybody has good judgment. And where you start to think, I don't need to have good judgment, I can just ask ChatGPT whether it's a good idea or not.
Yeah, but I
Then
suppose it depends
we're all
it depends
screwed.
where it's finding the answer from though, doesn't it?
I have no idea where it is finding the answer from.
Well, indeed.
What is the
Yeah,
bank of
indeed.
what's a good idea or not?
And I think that's the thing as well. Like, if your AI is feeding off the World Wide Web, then everybody has access to that. So is your AI feed telling you exactly the same as what it's telling the competition? So that
Well,
element of uniqueness and
yeah,
power and the magic.
I suppose you could argue, you could program it to say, review the Cannes winners of the last 20 years and judge it by that. I mean, maybe you could indeed do that.
Yeah, maybe.
But in that
Maybe.
case, we're all hosed, frankly.
Really interesting. So for people like me who are streaming from home in the UK, for anyone that has got serious FOMO not being in Cannes this week, what's been the standout unexpected moment for you that you've experienced? We want the kind of goosebumps, laughter, kind of think differently moment. Have there been some of those this week?
Well, I think that the thing that I've really enjoyed, there was an event that John Evans at the Uncensored CMO hosted, which was a conversation between Scott Galloway, the CMO of Elf Cosmetics, Corey, and Roy Sutherland, talking
Yeah.
about kind of is brand dead effectively. So Scott Galloway dropped his own pebble in the marketing community
It's
effectively.
probably a rock, isn't it? Rather
Probably
than a pebble.
exactly a contrarian rock, by saying that brand was dead and there was no need for brand anymore. That tech brands had kind of obviated the need for the helpful shortcut that brands represented, and the brand community kind of flailed really because he's
Yeah,
such
of
an
course.
influential and such a strong voice. And a couple of people, a guy called James Herman, wrote a very good rebuttal on LinkedIn, and so this was a chance to air that conversation in front of the marketing community, and the marketing in the audience. There was a really good audience of very senior, very experienced marketers. And Scott Galloway's point was twofold. One was that the companies, if you look just financially, the companies that really put on a lot of financial value
Mm.
on the markets over the last few years are people who haven't needed advertising, which turns out not to be true. Amazon is first was not is kind of right up amongst those companies and is the largest advertiser in the world. And his second point was really that he's a hotel nut. That's what his whole shtick is, and what his whole thing is, and that he doesn't need brands anymore for reassurance because he can just go into ChatGPT and say, "Hey, I need a great hotel with a gym. I've got a lap pool, and then I want something afterwards with a small restaurant with dark lighting." He says, "I can just ask that. I don't need a brand to tell me that anymore." Um, and again, there was a good response by James Herman on stage with David Tiltman on Monday at the Creative Impact session, just talking about what if that was true, hotel shares would be in a complete slide, and they're not.
Mm.
But that conversation was played out a bit, but then the CMO of Elf was brilliant. She talked about the fact that they'd reached a certain level through kind of getting supply chain right, which again was part of Scott Galloway's thing, which is all about getting the back end right, the front end
Yeah.
isn't so much anymore.
Physical distribution, right?
Yeah, and she said we
Yeah.
couldn't grow anymore after that, and we then started to invest in brand, and they've had 25 consecutive quarters of brand-led growth, and there
Wow.
was a cheer from the audience, so that
Of course, yeah.
highly
Fantastic.
partisan crowd in the entire thing. Um, and then Rory was as ever, very interesting. His whole thing, as you might know, is that actually marketing is people think marketing is, in his analogy, like open cast mining, which is you
Mm.
put in a certain amount of effort, you get a certain amount of reward. He said it isn't like that. It's more like treasure hunting, which is you'll do lots of things, and three things will have a disproportionately high impact, and the rest of them probably won't. And we need to completely rethink the kind of the way we think about return and measuring return
Mm.
within
Mm.
marketing. It's a different kind of process and requires a lot more experimentation. And the experimentation theme, I think, is again been something that's popped up a lot because Corey from Elf then talks a lot about how much they experimented and very deliberately and learning from that point of view. And clearly, as you know, in a world that prizes productivity and efficiency, there's less experimentation going on in marketing than there should be. But a lot of the people that we've been seeing on stage have been doing things that they were trying and suddenly popped and they said, oh, let's do more of that. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's been another theme that's come out for me.
Yeah, interesting. And I think in a time that we're at the moment, it's difficult on budgets as there's a lot of pressure on businesses in terms of performance. But I think if there isn't planned experimentation, so if you're not actually putting resource behind that as part of your annual planning, then it's very difficult in a time of economic challenge to actually do those experimentations. So I think it's really important that brand owners are thinking about that and planning for that in their budgeting and the way that they're working with agencies. So it's a wonderful point. And I think personally for me, I mean, for me, the power of brands is incredible. And for me, it's about meaning and storytelling and emotion and values and association and identity. And I think there's so much power in brands that I wish I'd been in that audience so I could have shouted loudly.
Well,
But
I completely agree with you. But I had equally. It wasn't actually here. It was a couple of weeks ago in London in a different situation. I met up with a guy in a consulting firm who'd been
mm,
a brand manager at a very large international FMCG company. And I said, "Oh wow, great job." And he said, "Not so much really." He said, "I thought it'd be a great job, but in fact, what my job really was as a brand manager was effectively to say, here's the idea that we are going to
mm,
be bringing to life. I've got 35 channels that I need to make sure this works in. And so me physically working through how it was going to manifest in those
mm,
35 channels was what I spent all my time doing. I wasn't spending my time thinking about, is this a good enough idea? What's the
yeah,
real insight? It was about the practicality of it. And again, I think this is where actually
mm,
AI could change everything. Because if AI effectively says, look, we will be an agent that will sort out most of that logistical
yeah,
stuff for you in some form or another. You don't have to
sure,
spend your time there. You can spend your time more upstream, thinking about the human connection, working out actually how we take that idea 30%, make it
yeah,
30% bold.
absolutely, yeah,
Then
absolutely.
I think that could be really interesting. You just
Mm.
have to hope that the CFO and CEO takes a responsible view about, with the time we've saved on AI, through AI, I'm going to reinvest that in giving Laura and Adam the time to do
And
this
value driving activities, yeah. And
rather than
also questions like, should there be 35 channels or should there be 10 done brilliantly? And I think,
well,
often AI doesn't ask you the provocative questions back. Maybe that's in the prompts, but I think there's a role also for brands to make sure that they're doing things really, really well, not just ticking the box and being in 35 spaces. Maybe that's appropriate, maybe it's not. But I think there's a serious role for humans to be challenging and being provocative with brands to make sure we're in the spaces that really works and really, excuse me, adds value and really drives impact.
no, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's true. But I think that there's again, it's a sort of it's a different form of FOMO, isn't it? It's a
Mm,
like, but if we're not there and our competitors are there, then are we missing out on something kind of important?
yeah,
And then
indeed.
another question that's going on in Canada as well, which is what does creative coherence and consistency look like in this highly proliferated
Mm,
and sometimes personalized environment? And also, frankly, if you are working more with content creators and the way that they get their own ripples is by putting a bit of themselves into
of
that
course, yeah,
message.
yeah.
What's in the old Tom Peters thing? What's tight and what's loose in that?
Mm,
What
mhm,
do you
mhm,
need to really hang on to in terms of the brand, and what can you kind of let go?
mm.
Because the I hate that word authenticity, but that's the other big thing
Of
about
course, yeah,
content
yeah.
creators. You have to be authentic,
Mm.
which means putting themselves into it. How is that okay for your brand? I mean, do you just then screen them and then carefully and then let them do whatever they want to do? That's a very live question for people.
Yeah, and how much control are you willing to give away, arguably?
Mm,
I think
mm.
what's really interesting with creators, and I love the term creators. For me, that's so much better than influencers, because I think sometimes influencers it can come very much like they're selling people stuff.
Yeah.
Not whereas creators feels a lot more genuine because there feels like there's a vested interest there and they're part of the brand and they're telling the story and hopefully it's creators that you feel like they genuinely use the brand or the product or service, and it's something that's close to them, aligns to their values. And then I think it can be really, really powerful.
Yes, I think that's true.
Last question from my side, and then musings from you and everything that you've seen over the last few days. Cannes is clearly a place for big waves, right? And big awards, big agencies, big impact, big campaigns crashing into the industry. But what tiny ripples have you heard in hallways that you think people should be paying attention to that maybe we're not yet?
Well, I think the kind of there's a lot of new work about the relationship between brand and performance that should be getting more attention than it probably is outside a small group of people who are really interested in that area. David Tiltman stood up at the beginning of the afternoon on Monday and said they always ask clients what their key strategic issue is. And short-termism is always there or thereabouts, and this time it's kind of surged right up. There we go. So the issue of short-termism is huge, and the question of how do we make progress as a community in convincing everybody who needs to be convinced that actually it's not a brand or performance, but as one presentation said, brand times performance, so the two things work together. There's that question of, I think, how do you get those things to be much, much more widely known and much more widely talked about than they are? And the person who I actually liked most was someone called Karen Crum, who's at UI Parthenon. So she's ex-planner from Cannes, who's now at UI Parthenon, which is part of UI as a consultancy, who's talking a lot about how do we frame what we do in the language of the CFO, and getting beyond, I suppose, the trivial versions of that and just little charts which show things going up, but actually talking about just fundamentally understanding what their mindset and language is and reframing it in a significant way. So I think what she's onto is very profound and very important for us, and I'm hoping that will become a much, much bigger wave that benefit us all.
I love that. I love the idea of brand times performance, because I think sometimes where brands come unstuck is they do one or the other and they take the foot off the pedal on one of them. And I've seen brands where they go full up pedal to the metal on the performance marketing and forget the long-term game.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And I think I love that. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Any other final words before we wrap up? Things that people should know about Cannes?
Obviously, don't be dull. It's a hugely expensive thing.
Go colourful.
Very colourful, exactly. Yeah, don't go along. Well, it's wonderful madhouse of ideas, egos, showing off, brilliance, and also the great thing about Cannes is it's this massive sort of serendipity engine. So you walk along the front and you bump into 18 people that you haven't seen for a very long time, different parts of your past, and sometimes they arrive at the same time. So you've got somebody you worked with in 1992 along with somebody. It's just this very strange kind of confluence of worlds that's exciting and bizarre.
I love that. And actually at the Ripple Impact, one of our things is about really grabbing onto those serendipitous moments, because actually they can create ripples beyond what you ever expected, whether that's your network or a conversation or a chance opportunity, and grabbing that with both hands and going for it. So yeah, I can imagine there's huge waves coming out of Cannes, even not just from what was on the main stage, but through the conversations and the connections and the relationships that have been formed or rebuilt over that time. So sounds fantastic.
Good.
Amazing. Well, Adam, thank you so much for bringing the energy and the ripples from Cannes to life for us all. That's a wrap for this Ripple, but we've got more Cannes magic coming later on today. So we've got one at 11 o'clock UK time, another one at 1:30 this afternoon. So tune in later for more Ripple moments, bold voices and fresh ripples. Thank you so much, Adam Morgan from Eat With Fish. I'm Laura Barber. This is the Ripple Impact, and stay tuned for now. Take care. Bye for now. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.